Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. Hitting a big one today, the JFK assassination. Was there really a second shooter on the Grassy Knoll? Kevin Jennings wrote this. Thank you, Kevin Jennings. I'm going to read it. I've never read this before. Of course, I'm familiar with the JFK assassination. This is one of those conspiracy theories where it's a bit like I'm not a conspiracy guy. We landed on the moon, no question about it. Humans have been up there. But the JFK one, you're like, look, I don't know what went on. I don't know what happens. But it's weird, right? There's a lot of sketchy stuff going on around that. With the bullets and stuff and all of this. I don't really know anything about it. I just know that it's weird. Hopefully, after this, definitely after this, it's extremely long, we will all know more. Let's jump in. I've always been of the belief that conspiracy theories are stupid. The Earth isn't flat, man walked on the moon, the government isn't run by lizards, and there aren't Jewish space lasers. That's not to say that conspiracies don't take place and people try to hide their existence. But nothing can stay secret forever. There's actually a fascinating research paper out of Oxford University addressing the matter of how long a conspiracy could be kept using data from real-world conspiracies, things like MKUltra or NSA Prism. Real conspiracies that were eventually leaked were used as data points. NSA Prism is the Snowden thing, right? That just blows my mind every time. I still think about that and you're like, if someone had told me that before Snowden, I'd be like, you need to put your tinfoil hat back on, mate. That's some crazy shit. And then Snowden's like, no, it's real. And it turns out that it's real. And that's just like, oh my God. Which is why there's definitely conspiracy theories that are real. Just some of them are really dumb, like the flat earth ones. Just nonsense. The researcher involved made sure to skew any estimated numbers in favor of the conspirators, essentially providing a best case scenario for a conspiracy theory being able to exist. Obviously, the more people that were involved, the less time it would take for the conspiracy to be uncovered. If something like climate change or the moon landing was actually a hoax, it would only have taken 3 to 4 years for the information to have come out, given there were hundreds of thousands of people involved. To keep a secret for a decade or longer, there would need to be fewer than 1,000 people involved. For an even longer-term secret, there of course needs to be even fewer people involved. Keeping something under wraps for an entire century should ideally have a maximum of 125 people involved. Personally, that number of conspirators feels awfully high for keeping something secret for so long, but we'll just assume that everyone involved is either highly motivated to not ever spill the beans, or not even on their deathbed lest some unfortunate accident befall their family and friends. Holy can you imagine knowing a secret that intense, or it's like, if you tell anyone, we won't just kill you, we'll kill your family. So you might be on your deathbed. If you tell anyone, we'll murder your children. It's like, holy shit. But then at some point, someone's going to be on their deathbed. They have no family. They have no friends. And they're going to be like, and Stanley Kubrick did it. And it's going to come out. 125 people also does seem like a lot, doesn't it, for a century? With JFK having been assassinated 60 years ago, the idea that there could still be some hidden conspiracy seems silly to me. Admittedly, before researching this, I wasn't that familiar with the evidence in the case. American schools were told that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing the president, and there would be absolutely no follow-up questions. I came into this assuming it would be a whole lot of nothing, but having looked through all the evidence that we'll go through today, it seems almost insane to me to believe that there wasn't another shooter. Holy shit. Kevin looked into this. Kevin is a skeptical man, and his mind has been changed by doing this. So that's super interesting. Because I'm already going in I'm normally the skeptical one, but I'm with the JFK thing. I'm there's some weird shit going on there. I'm very curious now. Let's go. This isn't like the supposed evidence of the flat earth where theorists will just point to a picture of the horizon to show you that it's a straight line either. This is actual forensics, science, and the first-hand testimony from the day that it happened, not decades later when people had time to misremember or distort their memories. If there was a second shooter on the Grassy Knoll, who could it have been? The Mafia? The FBI? Male models? Okay. Some zoo... Oh, is this a zoo... This must be a Zoolander reference, right?
But those two lookers who capped Kennedy from the Grassy Knoll sure as are.
A 60-year-old time-traveling assassin trapped in a 10-year-old's body? I don't know that reference. I don't know what that one is. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We haven't even talked about the events of that day or the evidence yet. So, to begin this story, we're going to have to go back. Back and to the left. Okay.
President going back and to his left.
Dallas, 1963. That book, 1963. Or Dallas 63? Or I think it's got a different name. It's got a couple of different names. It's a Stephen King book about a guy who goes back in time to kill Lee Harvey Oswald. It's so good. It's so long. It's possibly one of the longest books I've ever read. And it's possible I've read it twice. It's brilliant. It was November the 22nd, 1963, and President John F. Kennedy was traveling to Dallas, Texas. The purpose of his meeting was to try and smooth over relations between fellow Democratic Party members Ralph and Don Yarborough, oddly enough, no relation. Okay, is that a common surname? And Governor John Connally. Connally was a member of the Democratic Party at the time, but he was a Texas conservative and would switch his affiliation to the Republican Party a decade later. The residents of Dallas had known for a month that Kennedy would be coming to visit them, and nearly a week before the visit, the official route of the motorcade was published in the newspapers. Kennedy was to arrive at Dallas Love Field Airport and take a 45-minute drive through Dallas to the Trade Mart to begin business. It was only a 10-mile trip, so the plan was to travel at a casual 30 miles per hour or so, thus allowing all the residents in attendance to get a clear shot at the president. I mean, a clear look at the president. Even though the motorcade's route was planned out by the Secret Service, the entire thing was a dangerous proposition. They wanted to give ample warning about the president's route so that excited spectators, of which there were between 150 and 200,000, would be able to line up to see the president. However, publishing this information also meant that those with ill intent would have had plenty of time to prepare. But much of the route they took was the typical parade route downtown Dallas anyways, so people would have been able to guess even if it wasn't heavily publicized. In modern times, something like that would be manageable, but that's mostly because of the lessons learned in Dallas. Back then, the Secret Service operating budget was only $5.5 million per year, about $54 million in today's money. I know that's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money for this, is it? That seems quite cheap. That may seem like a good chunk of money, but Secret Service agents are paid around $135,000 per year. I guess they are very elite. That is a lot of money. I couldn't find numbers from back then, but I'll assume it was comparable when adjusted for inflation. With 350 agents in 1963, after payroll, they'd be left with less than $9 million in today's money for everything else that they had to do and purchase for the entire year. Not only is that very little money for such an important organization to have access to, but that's very few people as well. Of the 350 Secret Service members, only 26 were actually on the ground in Dallas the day of the motorcade. I guess in my mind, I was like, 350 Secret Service sounds like quite a lot. But that's only because in my mind, there's like, I don't know how many people like walk next to the president, what, 4 or 5, like surrounding him or whatever, like in their suits. But there's obviously people on rooftops, people scouting it out, going ahead, doing all this other shit that must be involved. So I guess it's not that many really. The other reason the number probably seems low is because it absolutely is, which is why the Secret Service now has 3,200 special agents, 1,300 uniformed officers, and another 2,000 technical and support personnel, and a multi-billion-dollar budget. That's insane. I mean, the Secret Service must do other stuff, right? I mean, famously, doesn't it do the money forgery thing? Isn't that because that's why it first existed with Lincoln? Because it was established on the day he was shot, that famous, like, fact, but it wasn't protection back then. So there's other stuff that they do as well, right? That does seem like, but when you think of Secret Service, you think keeping the president alive, right? That's a lot of money and a lot of people. Unfortunately, that was a lesson the US government was going to have to learn the hard way. Yeah, nothing like a presidential assassination to get the Secret Service budget increased.
That was the plan.
Then there was the president's car, a 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible. Although the vehicle was heavily modified, it was mostly for comfort rather than security. There were a couple of telephones installed that operated by radio as well, but nothing was added to provide additional security for the occupants. In fact, there was the opposite. The backseat was on hydraulics so that passengers could be lifted up to give everyone a better view. Pope-mobile shit right there. There wasn't any armor plating on the car, and the car's top was down for the motorcade. One thing that really bothers me in TV shows now that I know about it, and I know it's stupid, is the president's limo. Like, the Beast is what it's called in real life, and I've made a video or two about it probably, and it's a monster. Like this, you know those doors when you get onto a passenger plane and that door shuts and it's like super thick? That's like how thick those doors on that car are. And in movies, they're always like, yeah, it's just a regular limo with some thin door. And you're like, it's not like that. In reality, it's a beast. Occasionally, people will point to the car not having its bubble roof attached as a fatal mistake, but it really wouldn't have made any difference. It was just a plain plastic bubble. It wasn't even bullet resistant, let alone bulletproof. The bubble really only acted as a deterrent, giving the illusion of security while still leaving the president visible for spectators. That's kind of a genius move, being like, nah, it's 100% bulletproof. And then it's just a plastic sheet. Anyway, enough backstory about the lacking security. The motorcade began at the airport at 11:40 a.m. Due to the overwhelming crowd that came out to see the president, as well as Kennedy insisting that they made a couple of unplanned stops, the cars were falling behind schedule. The first 40 minutes were great and everyone involved had a lovely time. Riding along with President Kennedy were his wife Jackie, Governor Connolly and his wife Nellie, and two Secret Service agents who were the driver and the front seat passenger. The convoy had made it to Dealey Plaza, nearing the end of its journey. As the president's Lincoln convertible turned from Houston Street onto Elm Street, passing the Texas School Book Depository on its right, Nellie turned to face Kennedy and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." He replied in agreement, "No, you certainly can't." Those were the last words he would ever speak, as the sound of the first shot from the depository rang out through the streets. The timing was so poetic, you'd think Nellie was in on the conspiracy herself. She wasn't, but that timing feels more like a scene from a movie than real life. The first bullet struck Kennedy's upper back, passed through his neck, damaging one of his vertebrae and exiting out of his throat, just below his larynx. From the moment the bullet was fired from the depository and exited Kennedy's throat, everything becomes much less clear. As the car continued down Elm Street, anywhere from 2 to 4 more shots were fired. Connolly was also struck with a bullet entering his back, shattering 4 inches of one of his ribs, exiting through his chest, entering his arm just above the wrist, shattering his radius into 8 pieces, exiting through his palm, and finally lodging in his thigh. Good lord, did that guy get shot by one bullet and it passed through 3 parts of his body? That's crazy, and possibly part of what's going on today. Kennedy's hands were up to his throat, undoubtedly trying to put pressure on the bleeding. About 5 seconds after the first shot was fired, another shot went clean through Kennedy's skull. There is dispute as to whether this shot entered from the front or the back of his head. Sorry, Simon, but this next part is really important. Fragments of Kennedy's brain, skull, and scalp went everywhere, landing on the car's interior, on the windshield, on the hood of the car, on the trunk of the car, on 2 of the 4 motorcycle cops that were flanking the rear of the car, and on the Secret Service agents that were following behind, including on the driver's arm. Jackie climbed out of her seat onto the trunk of the car to collect pieces of her husband's skull and brain before Secret Service agent Clint Hill finished running from the trailing car to the president's Lincoln, directing Jackie back into her seat and hanging off the trunk as the car began accelerating away. They rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where Governor Connolly was able to recover from his injuries, but there was no hope for the president. John F. Kennedy was dead. We'll return to Dealey Plaza and the highly contested series of events later, but first, we need to take a look at the person that we know for sure fired at least some of those shots. Lee Harvey Oswald. Like most killers, Oswald didn't have a great childhood, but it wasn't as bad as most killers either. His father died before he was born, and his mother was described as self-involved, not giving him the love and the affection that he needed. That sucks and all, but compared to the horrific backstories of other killers, it's really lame. And as I've got another show, Casual Criminalist, which is another podcast that I do, and I always point out, even if someone had the most horrific background you could possibly think of, and they became a serial killer, there are thousands of other people, millions of other people, who had equally shitty childhoods and did not grow up to become serial killers. They just ended up being, regular fucked up, not needing to murder or do horrible crimes. This lack of affection resulted in Oswald being a shitty little arsehole, and he was constantly getting into trouble as a kid. When he was 12 years old, Oswald was arrested for his constant truancy and forced to undergo a psychological exam. The psychiatrist described him as basically being batshit insane, but in nicer terms, and with most of the blame being put on his mother. After dropping out of school a dozen times, at the age of 17, he was finally ready to enlist in the Marines like his older brother had. Normally you need to be 18 to serve in the military, but Oswald was able to join since his brother signed off on it as his legal guardian. The military only went slightly better for him than school had. Although he was in the Marines for 3 years, he was able to get himself court-martialed twice in that period. Court-martial's they're like going to court for regular people, right? So you've been naughty. The first court-martial came when Oswald accidentally shot himself with a handgun that he wasn't supposed to have. If I was his senior officer, I'd be like, punishment's enough. Give me that bloody gun, Oswald. Considering that he had scored high enough in his shooting tests to be given the designation of sharpshooter, there's definitely some delightful irony in him accidentally shooting himself. The second court-martial was the result of Oswald picking a fight with the sergeant that he thought got him in trouble for the first incident. He was imprisoned and demoted, and obviously this story ends with him getting honorably discharged. Really? Honorably? Oh yeah, and there was a third time he got in trouble when he was stationed in the Philippines and randomly shot his rifle into the jungle one night while on guard duty. Whoops! While serving with the Marines, Oswald began expressing his pro-Soviet beliefs to his colleagues, earning him the nickname Oswaldkovich. And failing to throw up nearly enough red flags for a US Marine in the 1950s, he also began teaching himself to read and speak Russian. They were really not into it at this time. Even nowadays, people are like, Americans are really intense about this. They're like, hey, you commie! And all this shit. In the 1950s, oh my god. Where, was it McCarthyism? That was to come a bit later. They were like routing commies out. He didn't do a great job of it, but he was putting in the initiative, and that should have also seemed suspicious. In 1959, he claimed that he needed to care for his mother and was given a hardship discharge, bumping him down to a member of the reserve and allowing him to go home. Wait, wasn't he honorably discharged previously? Kevin, I'm confused. I don't know, mate. What's going on? But Oswald wasn't really trying to leave the military to go be with his mother. He was leaving to go be with Mother Russia. Oh my. Later they find out he goes, I wasn't lying. Mother Russia, yeah. A month after being discharged from the Marines, he made his way to Moscow via Helsinki on a 1-week travel visa. Immediately upon making it to Moscow, he told his Russian tour guide that he wanted to defect from the United States because he loved communism and the Soviet Union. His application for citizenship was denied. Oswald waited until his travel guide was set to pick him up to escort him from the country, and then he slit his wrists in the bathtub, allegedly hoping to kill himself in a manner that would shock the poor woman. It was bloody, but the injury he gave himself was in no way serious. It did, however, get him thrown in hospital and put on psychiatric evaluation for a week. A few days after being released from the hospital, he went to the US Embassy in Moscow, declaring his desire to renounce his citizenship. He also made some vague threats about leaking military intelligence to the Soviets, though it's doubtful he actually would have known anything of value. I don't think you can renounce your citizenship unless you have another citizenship, or like you're on the path to getting one, or like some other country has accepted you. He'd be like, I'm a citizen of no country, and the Soviets are like, get out. He's like, well, where am I supposed to go? It'd be like that Tom Hanks in the Terminal.
Krakow.
Nevertheless, Oswald got his wish, and he was allowed to stay in the Soviet Union, where he planned to attend Moscow State University. Okay, never mind. So I guess I was wrong. Apparently you can do that. Except that's not how communism works. Oswald was shipped off to Minsk in Belarus, where he was assigned to work as a lathe operator. Things did not work out for you. He did receive higher pay and better accommodations than most, but he was also under constant surveillance for obvious reasons. His job sucked, but he did begin a relationship with a female co-worker while he was there. It was what he believed to be a serious relationship, though she just thought he was lonely and only dated him out of pity. Oswald proposed, and she refused. Womp womp. After this rejection, he began realizing that communism and the Soviet Union kinda sucked. Dude, you should have believed your mates. He'd be like, no, it's amazing. It's amazing. Oh no, what have I done? The work was boring and there was nothing to do with the money anyway. Soviet Russia wasn't really known for its happening nightclub scene. Shortly after the marriage proposal was declined, he wrote to the US Embassy asking for his passport back. I want to say that doesn't happen, but I also know he ends up back in the States. So I guess they were like, yeah, sure. I guess this stuff was like more chill back in the day, or maybe I just don't understand how it works. You see, he had basically walked into the embassy, thrown his passport at them, and said he wanted to renounce his citizenship. Except that's not how bureaucracy works. Oswald is like Michael Scott.
I declare bankruptcy!
Dude, you can't just do that. It's not how it works. You can't just declare your intent. There are official forms to be filled out. It doesn't matter how much you hate the country, rules are rules, and paperwork isn't going to fill itself out. A few weeks after sending that letter off, Oswald met another girl. A few weeks after that, they got married. She was 19 and a pharmacological student, and Oswald was already trying to move back to the United States, so if he shared those plans with her, then she may have just been using him to get American citizenship, where she could go and earn that sweet, sweet big pharma money. This is, of course, a lot of baseless speculation. I'll just be happy in knowing that he remained unloved until the day he died. Yeah, he's not a very sympathetic character, is he? Anyway, it took over a year, at which point the couple had already had a child, but in June of 1962, a little over a year before the assassination, known communist Lee Harvey Oswald and his new Soviet-born family moved to Dallas. To both Oswald's and my surprise, this wasn't really a big news story. When he defected to the Soviet Union and a couple of years earlier, it made national news, but now that he'd returned, he didn't receive received nearly the same level of attention. Man regrets life decisions, returns to America. I feel like that's positive news for America. That would be like a propaganda coup. All people thinking about defecting to the Soviet Union being like, it was so shit. This guy went over there and he wanted to be like study at the university or whatever. They made him a lathe operator and gave him no money. He came back. Once back in Dallas, he wasn't able to hold down a job for even a year. He was a bit of a dick, something that cost his wife all of the new friends that she'd made, and his arrogance and rudeness frequently pushed people just to the edge of physical violence. Co-workers also saw him reading Russian magazines, which definitely didn't help his likability. It's interesting, like, I don't have any friends who are dicks, because you don't make friends with dicks, and it's very rare. I find it very rare for me to meet someone in like a social setting and for them to be a dick, because generally you don't get invited to social settings if you're a dick. So I guess it's like neighbors and stuff. I don't really know my neighbors because it's just not a neighborly thing. Like, I just live in an apartment building and no one really knows each other other than like in passing. I don't know, just don't meet that many dickheads. Oh, there was one person I met who was a dick. I was just at dinner with some mates. And I was like, this is my other mate. And I think, I cut the guy some slack. I'm sure he was just having a bad day or whatever. But it's like, hang on. It's like, I vividly remember this because it was one of the times that you met, I met a dick. There you go. He was fired the first week of April in 1963, but he found a way to keep himself busy. The month before he was fired, Oswald was able to purchase an Italian military rifle from a World War II surplus store for $29.95. He was able to buy the gun through the mail using a fake name because, you, this is America. Yeah, that's amazing. You can't even, I don't think I can even buy something. I couldn't buy like a phone. That's a bad example. Because phones can be... No one cares. Like, I couldn't buy like a laptop using a fake name. Because how's it going to get delivered to me? I'd be like, just deliver it to this address. It's like, yeah, but your name's not on the door, is it? So obviously it just gets sent back. I don't think that's how works. I guess you could get it delivered to a P.O. box. But then there's going to be that name form. What are you going to fill in? Like, P.O. box. The week after he was fired, Oswald used his new rifle in an attempt to assassinate retired Army Major General Edwin Walker. The bullet wound up hitting the window frame, and Walker only received minor injuries from some bullet fragments landing in his forearm. Walker, who had been fired for distributing right-wing literature among his soldiers, was chosen as a target by Oswald because of his strong anti-communist and segregationist views. I vaguely remember this from that Stephen King book. Just in case this seems like a weird reason for a high-ranking officer to be fired, it doesn't at all. Military personnel in the US are prohibited from engaging in partisan politics. Oh, I didn't know that. That's great. I like that. I even have friends that worked at Raytheon, and they were strictly prohibited from making any politically charged social media posts since they dealt with military contracts. This military policy does make sense because partisan politics can get really polarizing, and it's probably for the best that our troops remember that they're all on the same side. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and I think that's great, and I think that general should have got fired for distributing. Whether it was right-wing or left-wing, I don't care. You shouldn't have politics in the military like that. You should just do the military stuff. It's dangerous if you have politics in the military, because then they're like, what if it just gets swayed a bit one way or the other? And then they're like, guess what? Time for a coup! Following the attempts on Walker's life, police had no suspects, which makes sense because his views make him seem like such a likable guy. He even wound up getting arrested on charges of insurrection and seditious conspiracy due to his later efforts in opposition of desegregation, allegations that saw JFK's brother, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, toss Walker in a mental institution, though he was ultimately released and never indicted on those charges. Within hours of the Kennedy, being like, supported segregation. It's like, bell end. You must know. And I guess you didn't, like, back in the day. But it's like some stuff today. You know that if you're opposing this, like, I guess like trans issues would be a more modern thing. You must know if you're like, no, that shouldn't be allowed. You must know you're on the wrong side of history. Right? You might not like it, you might not be okay with it, but you must know that in like 50 years you're gonna look like you were wrong. Right? You must know that. Because look how history has gone. Look at the whole of history. To be fair, throughout history, like if you go back far enough, it has gone swings and roundabouts, up and down with like liberalism and stuff. But in like more modern history, you're not going to look good in like the short to medium term or medium to long term. Within hours of the Kennedy assassination, the link between Walker and Oswald was identified, but it wasn't yet known. Following the attempt on Walker's life, Oswald went to New Orleans. His wife would join him a month later after getting a ride with her remaining friends. Friend, singular. They were in New Orleans a few months, but most of it isn't important. The highlights are that Oswald started a local chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, a pro-Fidel Castro activist group, and that he was arrested for disturbing the peace after getting into a physical altercation with a member of an anti-Castro activist group. I feel like, in the modern day, this guy would be being spied on by so many computers that, for him to get away with an assassination attempt today would seem just absurd, because he'd be just on so many watch lists. A charge like this is usually pretty minor, the equivalent to a bar fight. What makes the incident intriguing is Oswald's behavior after he was released from police custody. Before he left the station, he told police that he'd like to speak to someone from the FBI, a request they granted. Oswald told the agent that he was a member of the New Orleans branch of the FPCC, that they had 35 members, and that the branch leader was A.J. Hiddell. This was the same fake name that he'd used to purchase his rifle. Oh, dude, no, don't do that. You've got to have multiple fake names. You can't be using the same fake name for different things. Come on now. And when he was arrested after the Kennedy assassination, his wallet contained a fake ID with the name Alec J. Hiddle on it. There are some that speculate the name was meant to be an anagram inspired by Jekyll and Hyde. And at this point, it's worth noting that as a student, Oswald was considered to be of average intelligence, but that he both excelled at reading and failed at spelling. Yeah, I'm a pretty good reader. Like, reading is something I could do. Spelling is something I am atrocious at. Me and Harvey Oswald. In that regard, the idea that he would both attempt to make a fake name based on literary characters but also fail to properly construct an anagram checks out. I'm not fully convinced there was anything nearly so deep in the name selection, but I'd say it's reasonably plausible. If he saw himself as Jekyll and Hyde, it might provide insight as to why he went out of his way to put himself in front of the FBI. Alternatively, he could have just been a criminally insane moron. Oswald continued his pro-Castro activities in New Orleans for the next couple of months until his wife got a ride with her friend back to Irving, Texas, which is near Dallas. He was supposed to take the bus to join them a few days later after picking up his unemployment check, but instead he decided to take a detour to Mexico. Once in Mexico City, he went to the Cuban consulate and applied for a travel visa so that he could visit Cuba and then the Soviet Union. So he still likes the Soviet Union, even after he was like, they made me a lathe operator, I made no money, my wife didn't love me.
And it was cold, and everyone had guns and smelled like soup.
Why are you so enamored with the Soviet Union? It seemed to have been a bad time for you. Although your life seems to be a bad time, to be fair. So maybe you're just like, it was slightly less shitty there. I think it's like so much of life is just the attitude you have about it. Like, I don't know. I've always been like quite chipper. I've always been like, whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm up to. I'm sure if I was a lathe operator sounds really hard. Honestly, I'm not even entirely sure what a lathe is. But like working in a factory or something, as long as it's not like crushingly physically demanding or something, I'd be like, I'd probably have some friends, we'd sit around, we'd have a laugh. I've done boring jobs, and I've usually been like pretty like, this is all right. This is all right. Fortunately, I've always been very ambitious. Because otherwise, if I didn't have that ambition, I'd just be like, this is all right, I could do this. And then you're 50. But yeah, what am I talking about? It doesn't matter. Let's get back to who we're here to learn about, Harvey Oswald and not Simon. Though his visa was eventually approved, it took about 3 weeks. By that time, Oswald had already gotten bored and had gone back to Texas. However, the CIA was now well aware of his activities. This man had made national news by defecting to the Soviet Union, returned to the United States a few years later, and had now traveled to Mexico to contact the Cubans and the Soviets. They had every reason to suspect that he may be involved in some form of espionage, and the Dallas branch of the FBI was made aware of his activities. I've actually been to Cuba. It was quite interesting. There are all those old cars driving around. You got all these old buildings, people smoking cigars. It's a vibe. It's a vibe. I found the food very repetitive. Like, there just seemed to be, I can't even remember what it was, but I ate like pollo frito or whatever it is, like fried chicken with rice, like almost every day, or at least every other day. It was like some variation would have been good. Maybe I was just in the wrong places or whatever. It was delicious. The food was delicious, but it was very similar all the time. And also it's maybe like I realize, you know, British food, I live in Czech food. It's kind of pretty similar after a while, after a few days. But we also have like Italian restaurants, Mexican restaurants, all of this like international food, which I think was just less of a thing, at least when I went to Cuba, if I remember correctly, especially outside of Havana. Upon returning to Texas, Oswald was informed of a job opening at the Texas School Book Depository by a neighbor. It was a minimum wage job paying $1.25 an hour, but given his inability to hold down his previous jobs, he wasn't exactly overflowing with options. Neither he nor his wife drove, so he rented a room in Dallas where he would live during the work week and then traveled back to Irvine to spend the weekends with his wife and children. The FBI don't seem to have been aware of this arrangement because in early November, agents twice attempted to visit him in the Irving home while he wasn't there. Oswald didn't care for this at all, so he marched right down to the Dallas FBI office and demanded to speak with Special Agent Hosty, the agent that had been visiting his home. Hosty wasn't in the office, so Oswald left a threatening note with the receptionist. Exactly how threatening was this note, you ask? Well, that depends on who you believe. Doesn't sound like a good idea. Don't threaten an FBI agent. This feels like advice for my Casual Criminalist podcast. Don't threaten the FBI. It's a bad idea. According to Agent Hosty, the message read, "If you have anything you want to learn about me, come talk to me directly. If you don't cease bothering my wife, I will take the appropriate action and report this to the proper authorities." However, according to the receptionist, it said, "Let this be a warning. I will blow up the FBI and the Dallas Police Department if you don't stop bothering my wife. Signed, Lee Harvey Oswald. You maniac." If you actually wrote that, I can't believe he wrote that, because that is insane. I don't know what the offense is, but there's going to be something where it's like you threaten to blow up a government building. Seriously, you're going to jail for like a decade. What the fuck? Those are very different threats. It would be easy not to remember the exact wording of the note, but for either person involved to be unable to remember whether the note said "I will kill you" or "I will whine to your boss" seems hard to believe. Given what we know about Oswald and his delusions of grandeur, I'm much more inclined to believe the receptionist's account. It sounds like the mentally unstable lunatic that he was, whereas Hosty's account sounds far too normal and restrained. It's strange that both these people both work for the FBI and they just have totally different memories about this note, or they're lying for some reason. This feels like it must be a lie because it's so different, but people's memories are also terrible. So I believe that they both could believe this. I wonder how long afterwards they were asked about it. Of course, we could just read the note for ourselves to find out, but it no longer exists. Hosty said that he was ordered by his superiors to destroy the note as soon as Oswald was named as a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. Some of the conspiracy theories suggest that either the FBI or the CIA was involved in the assassination, or at least in hiding the identity of the real killer from the public. It sucks that the letter was destroyed, but this action was not likely done as part of some conspiracy or cover-up. If anything, an insane, threatening note would only provide a stronger case against Oswald as a singular anti-government vigilante. This seems much more like a "holy shit, the Bureau cannot suffer the embarrassment of revealing that the president was shot by somebody that they were actively investigating" sort of knee-jerk reaction. Yeah, that seems way more likely. It's like, wait, that guy left you a note saying he was going to blow some shit up? And he managed to assassinate the president later? Why wasn't he in prison, FBI? Yeah, I'd say that's a little... It's not a conspiracy. It's just that, shit. We shit the bed on this one. The day before the assassination, Oswald asked the co-worker he got rides from on weekends to take him back to Irvine to pick up some curtain rods. The long paper bag he retrieved, allegedly containing said rods, actually contained the rifle that he had purchased. On November the 22nd, Oswald brought his rifle to work and set up a sniper's nest on the 6th floor of the depository. When the presidential motorcade entered Dealey Plaza at 12:30 that afternoon, Oswald fired 3 shots from his rifle. The official count was that the first bullet struck both Kennedy and Connolly, the second shot missed, and the third shot was the fatal headshot. Bystanders heard shots coming from the depository, with at least one person having seen Oswald firing from the window. About 90 seconds after the shots were fired, police were inside the building, confronting him. When the police found him, Oswald was in the second floor cafeteria. He was calm, not seeming at all nervous or out of breath, and seemed genuinely shocked when an officer pulled a gun on him. Once the supervisor identified him as an employee, the officer lowered his weapon and continued searching the building. Oswald bought a Coke and walked to the front door before police sealed off the building. He then hopped on a bus before getting off to take a taxi back to his rented room. That is very casual, my dude. Why are you buying that Coke? You lost your mind. You just assassinated the fucking president. And you're like, yeah, I'll take a Coke for the road. Just leave. Quickly. Calmly. Collectedly. Just leave. Oswald only briefly stopped at his room, grabbing a jacket and a revolver. Don't get the revolver. You don't need that. What are you going to do? Have a shootout with the cops? Don't even grab the jacket. Just leave. It's Dallas in September. Wait, November. It might be a little chilly. It's, yeah, okay. But you just don't take the jacket. Deal with the cold. Come on. He walked for about a mile before being accosted by Dallas patrolman J.D. Tippett. Tippett pulled his car next to Oswald to ask some questions. When Tippit got out of the car, Oswald fired 4 shots, killing him before fleeing the scene in front of numerous witnesses who would easily identify him as the murderer. Wow, I don't even remember this. I didn't realize he shot a cop afterwards. Roughly 25 minutes later, a store manager saw Oswald outside his store. He was unaware that this was a wanted man, but he could tell Oswald looked suspicious and saw him duck into the adjacent movie theater without buying a ticket. The manager could... hiding in a movie. Don't commit crimes when you're on the run. This is basic shit. The manager contacted the theatre, who then called the police. When police arrived, Oswald pulled out his revolver and attempted to fire, but was disarmed and arrested for the murder of Tippit. The interrogations that followed were pretty pointless. Oswald did a whole lot of lying about easily verifiable information. He denied knowing any A.J. Hidell, despite both deliberately telling the FBI that he knew such a person and having identification on his person bearing the name in his own photograph. It's unlikely he would have ever told the truth, but he was never given a chance. On November 24th, 2 days after his arrest, Oswald was set to be transferred to the county jail. He was shot dead on live television during the transfer. To some, this was the end of a dark chapter in American history, but to others, the suspicious circumstances surrounding Oswald's murder only brought credibility to the notion that he had not been the only person to fire upon President Kennedy that day. Did Oswald act alone? A week after the Kennedy assassination, President Lyndon Johnson created the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, better known as the Warren Commission, named after Chief Justice Earl Warren, who was chairman of the commission. The Warren Commission was recommended in a memo to the President by Deputy Attorney General Nicholas Katzenbach. Katzenbach wrote that the investigations should be made public, stating that the public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover also wrote, "The thing I am concerned about, and so is Mr. Katzenbach, is having something issued so we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin." Though Hoover's memo was about the Dallas police not having enough evidence without receiving information from the FBI, the wording on both of these statements is a bit off. Yeah, that last bit being like, is the real assassin, makes me like, wait. Like, what? Because there's another assassin? You want to convince them that it's him? I mean, I get what he was meaning, and it's just about how you read it, so it could be completely innocent. And also, if this was conspiratorial, they wouldn't have let it out. It would be easy for someone to interpret either or both of these quotes as meaning that they did not believe Oswald actually acted alone, just that the public needed to believe that he did. Looking at it from that perspective, Hoover's wording definitely sounds a lot worse. Of course, this wasn't all known to the public yet. The findings and the interviews from the Warren Commission were made public, but it would be a long time before these memos were released. Okay, sorry, I thought they were part of the commission, so these were released much later, which does make it sound more suspect, although I really think, they're probably not writing down their crimes. I think they just didn't mean it. Like, it could be interpreted as there's another shooter. The findings of the Warren Commission were predictable. On September the 24th, 1964, the 888-page Warren Report was published. 2 months later, 26 volumes of support documents were published as well. Just like Katzenbach had suggested, they had conducted a completely public investigation, except for the 5 million pages of unpublished records that were sent to the National Archives to be locked away for 75 years, as was the style at the time. And just like Hoover had suggested, the Warren Commission issued something to convince the public that Oswald was the real assassin and that he acted alone. Also, just to go back there, 5 million pages. That is an insane amount of stuff that's going to become uncovered in... It's got to be 1963, and it's 2022, so that's 59 years. So it's only 16 more years, and that stuff's all going to be released. That's pretty crazy. And for a while it worked. Before the Warren Report was released, only 29% of Americans believed that Oswald acted alone. After the report, polls showed that an overwhelming majority of Americans, 87% of them, believed that Oswald was the lone shooter. However, as the years went on, this perception would change. Evidence would be more thoroughly examined, and advancements would be made in forensic science, and more documents would be revealed related to the assassination. These documents would prove that, at least on some level, the government was trying to hide the truth from the American people. This is what Kevin was talking about at the beginning. Every conspiracy, as time goes by, will be revealed as, unless it's a very small group of people, as so many people are involved. Like, someone's going to talk, someone's going to leak something. It certainly didn't help that President Johnson, Bobby Kennedy, and 4 of the 7 members of the Warren Commission didn't believe in the conclusion of the report, or were at least highly skeptical of it. They may have publicly acknowledged the findings for the good of the country, but they didn't necessarily believe it. When the public learned that at least half of the people who wrote the report were skeptical of its findings, well, that's certainly going to raise a whole lot of questions about its veracity. When did they learn about this? It must have been sometime later, because if all of these important people didn't believe in it and were like, I don't believe it, then they're never going to get an 87% approval rate of like Oswald acting alone, and they'd definitely be continuing an investigation, no? We'll get to the evidence and the conspiracy theories shortly, but I believe that whether or not there was a second shooter on the Grassy Knoll is potentially a completely separate question from whether or not Oswald acted alone. Yeah, well, I mean, Oswald could think he's acting alone, and then someone else is kind of secretly helping him out. Or someone else was also trying to assassinate Kennedy that day, which is kind of insane. Can you imagine being Oswald and you're shooting Kennedy, and then you realize someone else is also shooting Kennedy at the same time? You'll be like, what the fuck is going on? Not all of the conspiracies involving Oswald involve a second shooter. Some more broadly accuse him of carrying out the hit on behalf of Soviet Russia due to his love of communism. Of course, he only loved communism in theory, despite receiving better accommodations than most. He fully expressed in his diary that his time spent actually living under communism kinda sucked. My biggest issue with the idea of Oswald being part of a greater conspiracy is that he'd need to find someone that was actually willing to work with him. It's never going to say, because we know he's a dickhead and no one likes being around Oswald. He was an unlikable douchebag and a loose cannon, someone who throughout his entire life seemed to have few, if any, friends. When he tried to defect to the Soviet Union, he was denied at first, then given a shit job and kept under constant surveillance. When he went to Mexico City in an attempt to travel to visit Cuba, the Cuban consulate wasn't interested. He said that he was disinclined to approve Oswald's visa on the basis that a person like him would do more damage to the revolution than good. In the Warren Commission's attempt to explain Oswald's motivation, they had this to say about him. Quote begins. It is apparent, however, that Oswald was moved by an overriding hostility to his environment. He does not appear to have been able to establish meaningful relationships with other people. He was perpetually discontented with the world around him. Long before the assassination, he expressed his hatred for American society and acted in protest against it. Oswald's search for what he conceived to be the perfect society was doomed from the start. He sought for himself a place in history, a role as the great man who would be recognized as having been in advance of his times. His commitment to Marxism and communism appears to have been another important factor in his motivation. He also had demonstrated a capacity to act decisively and without regard to the consequences when such action would further his aims of the moment. Out of these and the many other factors which may have modeled the character of Lee Harvey Oswald, there emerged a man capable of assassinating President Kennedy. Quote ends. While much of the Warren report is contested, I find it hard to argue with this analysis of Oswald as a person. Yeah, it seems to be, it's very wordy, as these government things tend to be, but it does seem pretty bang on. In terms of some large conspiracy, he seems at best capable of being a patsy or a fall guy. Even then, it's difficult to believe someone so volatile and unpredictable would be trusted enough even to undergo a suicide mission. Like the Cuban said, someone like him would do more harm than good to the mission. I feel like even for a suicide mission, I feel like suicide mission has got to be done by the person who's like got the nerves of steel, not some guy who's like halfway to insane. Without knowledge of the identity of the second shooter, should one exist, it will be impossible to definitively determine whether or not they and Oswald were linked in some way. It may seem outrageous to believe that there could be two unconnected shooters at the same time, but the world is a crazy place. I don't know if it could possibly be that crazy, though. That is a huge statement. To that end, though, let's take a look at the Umbrella Man. When Kennedy was shot, it was a bright and sunny day. And yet, standing right by the place where he was shot, there was a man standing with an open umbrella. I believe he was the only person in any of the pictures or videos from Dealey Plaza to have an umbrella with him at all, but he was absolutely the only one to have one open. People have umbrellas in the sun, though. Like, maybe this guy's got, like, I don't know, some like skin disease or skin condition where he has to have an umbrella to shield him from the sun. It doesn't seem super unreasonable. And also, if you are, like, it's a bright sunny day and you're on an assassination mission, using an umbrella just seems like an excellent way to draw unwanted attention to yourself. When Josiah Thompson, an accomplished private investigator who has since been involved in several high-profile cases, wrote his in-depth analysis of the assassination, 6 Seconds in Dallas, he believed that the Umbrella Man was part of the conspiracy to kill the president. It was believed that the Umbrella Man was used to signal the shooters to fire, potentially opening and closing his umbrella to signal to fire again. It was a beautiful day in Texas, and there was this man with an open umbrella standing right by where Kennedy was shot. How could these two things not be related? I don't know, there's reasonable explanations for a dude just having an umbrella. But like I say, the world is a crazy place where things happen all the time. No matter how strongly it seems that the two things must be related when it comes to the actions of different people, as they could easily have nothing to do with one another. In 1976, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations was created to reinvestigate the assassination of Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. They made a public appeal for the Umbrella Man to come forward, identify himself, and explain exactly what he was doing. So he did. Oh my God, really? I don't know this part of the story. I mean, to be honest, most of my knowledge comes from the Stephen King book, so I guess this wasn't relevant. So that it's bad that most of my knowledge of JFK's assassination comes from a fictional book about time travel. But whatever, here we are. I'm learning more today, bettering myself. The Umbrella Man was named Lewis Witt, and he was completely unaware that he was involved in a conspiracy theory about the assassination. His explanation was that the umbrella was a visual protest of the actions of Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy. The umbrella was a reference to British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, a fashion accessory heavily associated with Chamberlain and often used in 1930s political cartoons as a symbol of Nazi appeasement. Witt wanted to protest the Kennedy family for appeasing Hitler before World War II, and since JFK's Harvard thesis was on the subject of appeasement, particularly by England, he felt that Kennedy would understand the reference. When Thompson, the author who initially brought attention to the Umbrella Man, heard this story, he immediately knew that it was true. It had to be true, because it was too ridiculous a story not to be. Yeah, I totally believe it. And also, if the Umbrella Man, if he just wouldn't have come forward. If he was like, no, why we did that? About appeasement, blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't have come forward if you'd actually been signaling the shooters. You'd have just stayed in the shadows and never revealed yourself, because of course you would. Not only was the umbrella meant as a benign symbol of protest, Witt's protest wasn't even really aimed at the president. It was aimed at his father. Fortunately, Thompson wasn't some nutjob conspiracy theorist who wanted to push the narrative anyway. In fact, over the next 50 years, he would update and correct both his original book and the works of others, using the latest science and evidence, culminating in the release of Last Second in Dallas in 2021. That is excellent. And a guy, you can imagine, like, in your mind, you're like, he's writing a book and it's selling, he's going to sell more books because he sells this salacious conspiracy theory, right? That's kind of what enters your mind, like, immediately. And it's awesome that this is the kind of dude who's like, no, new evidence came to light and I'm adjusting my opinions, which is so fucking rare and so fucking cool. Thank you, Thompson. Legend. The Umbrella Man remains an important cautionary tale, especially among those that would investigate conspiracy theories. Two things that may seem like they must absolutely be intrinsically linked could easily have nothing to do with one another because people do weird shit. In this case, it was something benign being falsely conflated with something malicious, but the same can hold true in two malicious acts. Oswald shot Kennedy in Dealey Plaza from the book depository. Are we talking about another malicious act being another shooter at the same time? Unrelated. That's so wild. There are some fringe conspiracy theories out there that think that part's all a lie, but there's enough evidence that we could pretty much just cite that as fact. However, if there was, in fact, a second gunman, that does not mean, by default, that they and Oswald were connected. It may seem difficult to believe that two people could both try to assassinate the president in the same time at the same place while having nothing to do with one another, but that by no means makes it impossible or even improbable. I'm curious to hear how Simon feels about that, but Oswald feels like too much of a psychotic loner to me to be even used as a puppet by someone else. But now that all of that backstory and the official account is finally out of the way, let's get into the conspiracies. Okay, Kevin, I'll tell you how I feel. I feel, at first, I kind of wrote it off as out of hand, as that would be too much of a coincidence. But also, if you're Harvey Oswald or any potential assassin and you're looking for a time to assassinate the president, there's going to be limited opportunities to do that. And this one, him riding through Dallas on a pre-planned route, is just like, that's a good opportunity. And maybe someone else who wants to assassinate the president sees that as a good opportunity. About them shooting at exactly the same time, they were both probably lining up their shots, and one of them took it first, and then the other guy was like, holy shit, okay, let's go. And he was like, well, I got to take my shot now and help out because otherwise they're going to drive off. So I have come around to it being not quite as unlikely as I initially thought it could be. Evidence of a second shooter. Over the nearly 60 years since Kennedy's assassination, there have been volumes of research done. Theories have come and gone, but one that persists is that there was a second shooter on the Grassy Knoll. There are a few key pieces of evidence that suggest the existence of a second shooter. There's a Zapruder film, the Dicta Belt recording, and eyewitness and ear-witness testimony. First, we'll cover the witness accounts, since those tend to be the least reliable. As the motorcade traveled down Elm Street, it was approaching the Triple Overpass, a bridge that went across 3 roads. With only 26 Secret Service agents available, this was one of the few locations where agents were stationed. Because spectators on the overpass would be directly above the president's head, it was seen as the premier location for an assassin to strike from. But there was a dispute among witnesses over both how many shots were fired and where they were fired from, which isn't terribly surprising given what an emotional and chaotic experience it would have been for those in attendance. Also, there's going to be big buildings around reflecting shots and stuff and echoes, and that's going to be confusing evidence. It was estimated that there were between 500 and 700 people at Dealey Plaza, and this was the very end of the motorcade, and after the triple overpass, they were going to get on the highway, so most spectators had been in other areas downtown. A total of 190 witness statements were taken. Of those, nearly 80% agreed that they heard 3 shots. As for where those shots were coming from, this was a lot harder to determine. Between echoes and shockwaves and other acoustic nonsense, pinpointing a direction could be difficult, especially given the circumstances. A full 2/3 of the witnesses didn't give any indication of where the gunshots came from. Of those that did, 51% cited the area by the Grassy Knoll or the Triple Overpass, while only 39% claimed they came from the depository. I want to address the issue of the majority of people only hearing 3 shots. There were 3 shell casings found in the depository, along with Oswald's rifle, so the existence of the 4th shot is pretty important. The official story from the Warren Commission was that Oswald's second shot missed. However, the evidence we'll be examining suggests that it was actually Oswald's first shot that missed, a hugely important distinction. When the firing began, many people, including Secret Service agents, thought it was a car backfiring or some stupid kid setting off firecrackers. If it was the first shot that missed, it may not have been until the second shot hit Kennedy that people really started registering what was happening, causing them to only count that shot and the 2 that followed. The ear-witness accounts may have been somewhat inconsistent, but those on top of the triple overpass knew what they saw. After the shots rang out, at least 8 people on the overpass saw a puff of smoke coming up from the tress by the stockade fence on the Grassy Knoll, smoke that could easily have been the result of a firearm. They quickly sprung into action to investigate the area, as did many others near the fence that believed they had heard something. Despite the unreliability of eyewitness testimony and stuff, the fact that there were so many people seeing a puff of smoke arise from an area that could have been where the shot came from after the shots went off is just like, there were a lot of people. For those unfamiliar with the layout of the Grassy Knoll, it was a little hill that came up from the sidewalk. At the top was a stockade fence that separated the grassy area from a parking lot. There were also trees that would have made someone behind the fence virtually invisible. There is one photo that potentially shows someone's head poking out above the fence, but it's a really low-quality image, and the other evidence should be compelling enough without introducing grainy photos of Bigfoot. When people arrived to search the parking lot, they didn't find anybody there. There were fresh footprints in the mud right up against the fence, but there was no sign of any person. By itself, this obviously doesn't mean anything. Police found Oswald immediately after he shot Kennedy, and he was still able to buy a Coke and casually walk away. Like a maniac. All a shooter behind the fence would have had to do is toss their gun in the trunk of their car and walk away. Or they could just wait for the others to get close and then melt into the crowd of people that were searching for an assassin. If they had even 10 or 15 seconds before people arrived, and it sounds like they had significantly more than that, escaping immediate detection would have been pretty trivial. The witness accounts certainly indicate a strong possibility of someone on the Grassy Knoll, but eyewitness testimony is basically the least reliable form of evidence at this point, so let's look at some harder evidence. It's crazy, like, how, the saying, like, caught red-handed or whatever, or, like, eyewitness testimony, you associate it with it being like, whoa, I saw you doing it. And now it's like, yeah, that's pretty unreliable compared to other forms of testimony. There's even been arguments to say that eyewitness testimony should not be used in court, because it's just not reliable enough. I mentioned the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, earlier, but I never actually said what they decided. At first, they were ready to declare that Oswald acted alone. Then, the Dicta Belt tape was introduced, and it very quickly changed their minds. A Dicta Belt was just a fancy recording device made by the dictaphone company, but the Dicta Belt on one of the officers' motorcycles was stuck in the on position during the assassination. Basically, one of the police motorcycles had a hot mic. Why would a police motorcycle have a recording device on it? That's weird. I mean, I assume it's a standard thing, otherwise Kevin would be like, it's weird that there was this dictaphone device on this bike. The recording has a substantial lack of any clarity due to crosstalk and random noise, but it is an extremely important recording. I mean, that's gonna know how many shots there were. Surely. Extensive audio analysis was done on the sound waves from the recording. Audio scientists conducted tests in Dealey Plaza to see what the echo patterns of gunshots in various locations throughout the plaza would sound like when recorded from different locations that the motorcycle could have been at while it was recording. In total, they collected about 2,600 data points to compare against the Dictabelt recording. They compared the sound waves from their tests with the sound wave from the Dictabelt recording. Within the wave patterns, they found matches for what should have been 4 gunshots, 3 from the depository, and 1 from the Knoll. It's not conclusive, because this is a kind of weird science, I guess, in a way. It seems like they're matching patterns and stuff, which is, I don't know how reliable that's going to be, but it is definitely pushing in the direction of there being another shooter, right? Even if it's not enough to be like, for sure, it's enough to be like, that's suspicious. When the audio was synced up with video that we'll mention in a moment and played for the HSCA, it was shocking. Though they had been previously prepared to rule that Oswald acted alone, they immediately changed their decision and said that there was a 95% probability there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll. Holy shit. Okay, maybe the science behind this is legit, because that is a huge swing. The HSCA's final report concluded that 4 shots were fired, that Oswald's first shot missed, and that the shot from the grassy knoll also missed. The HSCA's final report concluded that 4 shots were fired, that Oswald's first shot missed, that the shot from the grassy knoll missed, that the Warren Commission did not take the possibility of a conspiracy seriously enough, and that the FBI and CIA were full of organizational failures, miscommunication, and had both prioritized their own desire for secrecy above the needs of the investigation by the Warren Commission. So while the first government investigation ruled that Oswald acted alone, the second ruled there was almost definitely a second shooter, although they ruled out most of the popular conspiracy theories, such as those involving either the Cuban or Soviet government. They also claimed that the shooter on the grassy knoll missed, because of course they did. This report was published in March 1979. What else could they say than the man who killed the president had been at large for the last 16 years? No. Whoever was on the grassy knoll definitely had to have missed. For America. The Dictabelt tape became so famous that in July 1979, records containing the audio were included as a centerfold in a porno magazine. I'm sure the idea of putting murder evidence in a porno mag sounds weird to you, Simon. It totally does. I'm waiting for to see what this is about. Like, was there a naked woman holding it in front of her lady parts? Like, what? What's going on? But you lot put porno on page 3 of your newspapers, so I don't want any guff. We don't do that anymore, and we definitely did do that in the past. Not in, like, proper newspapers. In, like, shitty newspapers. No offense to the Sun. Slight offense to the Sun. Based on an oddity in the recording that was ironically discovered from someone listening to one of these porno magazine records, the DOJ paid for the National Academy of Sciences to review the Dictabelt audio. Upon a 1982 review, the Academy discredited the recording, claiming that it occurred over a minute after the shots had been fired, and the researchers had conflated random noise with gunfire. About 30 years later, Josiah Thompson believed that he had discredited the recording thanks to the help of the original audio scientist that had appeared before the HSCA. I'd have preferred using a different scientist, but it is what it is. So maybe this audio recording science isn't as hot like I was thinking? I don't know. The Dictabelt has been discredited by comparing a sound at the beginning of it with a sound from a different recording that was believed to have been from 60 to 90 seconds after the assassination. Upon further analysis of audio hum frequencies that would allegedly indicate how many devices the recording had been run through, they concluded that the version of the audio used to discredit the Dictabelt was not an original. They argued that the other recording was spliced and overlaid, creating the illusion that the Dictabelt was recording the aftermath of the assassination rather than the attack itself. Personally, I'm a little bit torn on this one. I believe Thompson is working in good faith and focuses on good science. But the explanation, as I understand it, sounds a little implausible. The National Academy of Scientists winding up with a degraded second or third generation copy of the audio instead of the original isn't at all crazy. But once you add in that it was deliberately and deceptively spliced or overlaid, it becomes a harder pill to swallow. On the other hand, the Dictabelt audio lines up so perfectly with the video that it's equally hard to believe that it was just random noise. Oh wait, to me it just sounds like someone wanted to give them a tape to discredit the original recording, which seems to be legit. Right? There's someone's playing with them. This is either a case of deliberate cover-up, yeah, I think maybe, or an instance of man searches for proof of something, man finds thing that supports his belief. Yeah, okay, but scientists, while they do fall into this trap, do so less because they understand how, like, science works and, like, proving things and hypotheses and stuff. And I think that this is a little bit of a cover-up, to be honest. I'll put my conspiracy tinfoil hat on and be like, I think someone's messing with them to try and discredit the tape. If the Dig-to-Bell tape really was from a minute after the assassination, then it doesn't disprove anything. It just becomes irrelevant. Luckily, there's still the most important piece of evidence, the Zapruder film. The Zapruder film was a silent home movie shot by Abraham Zapruder on 8mm color film. It's not the only home movie of the assassination, but it's the highest quality and most complete. Kennedy also received the fatal headshot when his Lincoln was at the point in its path closest to Zapruder, so it provides the best and most traumatizing footage of the assassination possible. The film is 486 frames long and was shot at 18.3 frames per second, making the total runtime 26 seconds. The Zapruder film is the single most important piece of evidence in this case, and one of the most important films ever recorded. Zapruder had loved Kennedy and hated the fact that he was the person that caught the assassination on camera, though it worked out pretty well for him. Within 2 days, it sold the film to Life magazine for $150,000, roughly $1.5 million in today's money, with the stipulation that they couldn't show frame 313, the one where Kennedy's head explodes. He donated $25,000 of that to the widow of Officer Tippit, the policeman that Oswald killed, before entering the movie theater. Zapruder died in 1970 at the age of 65, but Life sold the video back to his family in 1975 for $1. That's not a typo. The US government would later seize the film by eminent domain in 1999. Wait, I thought eminent domain was something that governments use when they want to, like, build an airport and your house is in the way. They could just use it to take your shit? Fuck off, governments. I'm building a bunker! Of course, eminent domain requires that the government pay a fair price for anything that they seize, and since it was a historically important and one-of-a-kind item, the government paid Zapruder's family $16 million, which is nearly $29 million in today's money. Good fucking lord. Holy shit, okay, forget it, I'll take it. Take it. Eminent domain, my ass. Come on, let's go. Jesus, why wouldn't they just like, well, you know, Life sold it to you for $1, and after like 20 years of inflation, that's $1.75. Congratulations, $1.75. No, $32 million, $29 million in today's money. Jesus. That's a windfall. As for the contents of the film itself, if you've ever seen the footage of the assassination, this is almost definitely what you're looking at. What you're looking at. I have seen it. It has been painstakingly analyzed for decades, with every single frame of the film looked at in excruciating detail. It's been digitally enhanced with new technology, synced to the potential audio, and even examined in every way imaginable. We're not going to do a frame-by-frame analysis, but we will touch upon the most important aspects. The gunfire began at approximately frame 190. But from the video alone, it's difficult to tell the exact moment. Kennedy's right arm was raised to wave to the crowd on his right, and it seemed like he was starting to react. However, from frames 207 to 224, he is obscured by a sign for the highway past the triple overpass. There's about 1 second between when the first shot was fired and when he was hidden by the sign, and another second until the vehicle emerges. Once back in view, Kennedy is clearly holding his hands up to his throat, but Governor Connolly does not appear to be showing signs of having been injured yet. If the same bullet passed through both of them, as the Warren Commission had argued, it should have all happened in the space of a single frame, given the speed of the bullet. The first pain response Connolly seems to manifest is at frame 238. There is an argument that he may have had a delayed pain response, and this is possible. Alternatively, there is the possibility that Oswald's first shot did not miss Kennedy, and the second shot he fired was the one that hit Connolly. The second shot was fired just before they came back into view, so if this one hit Connolly, he would have been reacting less than a second after being shot. We'll briefly touch on the magic bullet theory later, but for today's episode, it's not actually the most important thing. We're trying to determine whether there was a second shooter, and since shots 1 and 2 were both fired by Oswald, it doesn't really matter Which one hit Connolly other than to discredit the Warren Commission in support of a government conspiracy? The part we are most concerned with begins at frame 313. Having visual aids would certainly help here, but since this show is also a podcast, I don't really think Simon wants to look at them anyway. I'll have to go on without it. Hell, I'd have been happier if I didn't have to watch the Zapruder film so many times and so intently, but this topic was my idea, so it's my own stupid fault. Yeah, I've seen it once, and I have no desire to watch it again. Seeing someone murdered is, just that's not something you really want to see. I remember, I think we made a YouTube video about this once, and we showed shots of it, and it was like, well, no, obviously we're not going to show a dude getting his head blown off because, well, it's just not nice, and I don't know, it's also kind of disrespectful, I feel, to his family, right? I know he's long dead, but he's still got living relatives. Jesus. Anyway, at frame 313, the fatal bullet struck Kennedy. Blood, brain matter, and skull fragments exploded from his head, sending it back and to the left. At this point, the grassy knoll was in front of him and to the right, so this motion would have been following the trajectory of a bullet fired from that direction. There were arguments made before the Warren Commission that his head could not have been propelled in the direction from which the bullet made contact after the exit wound was formed, but the science was flawed at best. At frame 327, we can see what is believed to be the fourth shot. Kennedy's head is suddenly propelled forward, following the trajectory that a bullet fired from the book depository would have taken. A close inspection of the individual frames shows more blood and brain matter being expelled from the front of Kennedy's head. These shots struck Kennedy roughly 0.76 seconds apart. There have been various tests conducted by SWAT snipers, the NRA, and private citizens. The results have varied, with some showing it was possible for him to fire 3 shots and some showing that he could not have fired 3 shots within a span of 6 seconds or so. Looking at all the different data, I think it's safe to say that Oswald could have fired 3 shots within the time span. Even if the minimum cycle time that his rifle would mechanically allow was 2.3 seconds, as given by the Warren Commission, the clock doesn't start until he fires the first round, meaning that he would only need to cycle the rifle twice. In some of the tests, this was more than adequate for a skilled marksman to fire 3 aimed shots. And that's fine. Though the majority of people in attendance only reported hearing 3 shots, they were in agreement that the final 2 shots were much closer together than the first and second shot were. This indicates that the final 2 shots were much closer together than the first and second shot were. This indicates that the final 2 shots they heard were the ones the Zapruder film shows struck Kennedy 0.76 seconds apart. It may have been possible for Oswald to fire 3 shots within the overall time span, but it was absolutely not possible for him to get off 2 shots in 3/4 of a second with a rifle that he had. So if they can prove that there were two shots close together, then that seems pretty locked down that there was a second shooter. There was also the matter of blood and brains that we mentioned flying everywhere at the beginning of this episode. Skull fragments and brains were violently propelled outward from the back of Kennedy's head, once again flying back and to the left.
Back and to the left.
The left side of the hood and windshield of the follow-up car were covered, as were 2 motorcycle officers to the left side of Kennedy's car. This splatter would have been consistent with a shot fired from the grassy knoll. The motorcycle officer that was further forward reported that he had been hit in the chest by the debris with such intense force that he thought he had been shot. It's highly improbable that this officer could have been hit in the chest with that amount of force if the bullet had been fired from behind. Then there was the blood on the Lincoln's windshield and hood. This would have been the likely effect of the second shot striking Kennedy's head from the opposite direction. I know it's all really gross, but it seems pretty conclusive as well. If we are allowed to include the dicta belt tape as well, it seems even more damning. The final 2 shots line up perfectly with frames 313 and 327. Maybe it's just confirmation bias, but being able to hear the gunshots while seeing Kennedy's head knocked backwards and then forwards is really compelling evidence. I say like the blood splatter, the brain splatter, all of this stuff is like there were 2 shots from different directions, right? There's a lot of evidence saying that there's something going on here. I don't know if it's I guess the conspiracy was there a second shooter, but it doesn't seem like anyone's saying absolutely not, other than the Warren Commission, which people didn't like in the first place, was reinvestigated. So is anyone saying, other than the common knowledge of people and Kevin being taught in school that there was 1 shooter, is it a conspiracy that there were 2 people, or is it just maybe there were 2 people? Because it doesn't feel like a conspiracy at the moment. It just feels like there's some evidence to say that there's maybe a second shooter. So first the Warren Commission ruled out Oswald acted alone. Then, thanks to the dicta belt, the HSCA ruled that there was a second shooter. Then when the DOJ felt they had discredited the audio recording, they again declared that Oswald acted alone. So which is it? And what exactly doesn't the government want us to know? I think the government just wants people to be happy with there being one shooter who is now dead, because it's simple and tidy, and they haven't let a criminal who killed a president be on the loose for the last however many decades he survived afterwards. Potentially could still be alive. I think that benefits the government, because then it's like they haven't failed. But I don't think that's a conspiracy. I think that's just like sensible for a government. That's probably good policy. And I think that the dictative belt tape being fake or whatever, I think we can just write off as it was clearly interfered with. Evidence of a conspiracy. This section could easily be called circumstantial evidence of a conspiracy, but that doesn't sound nearly as catchy. There is absolutely no hard evidence tying Oswald to a greater conspiracy, which is why I argued that it was possible that he acted alone despite the presence of a second, unrelated shooter. Whether he was part of a conspiracy or not, some of the facts of this case do point to a larger conspiracy in play. If nothing else, we know that the government hasn't been entirely forthcoming about the investigation, and right now, I think it's going to have to be something really compelling to make me believe that there's something conspiratorial beyond just a second shooter, either by coincidence or by design or whatever. But to be like, the government did it, I don't think so. It's going to have to be really super strong evidence or something like that, or the Cubans or the USSR. I'm pretty skeptical. The Warren Commission was supposed to be public. They published their report along with 26 volumes of supporting documents, but that wasn't all the information they had. We know that most of the documents were sent to the National Archives, where the official policy was they remain sealed for 75 years. However, this rule no longer exists. It was essentially replaced by the 1966 Freedom of Information Act, but just because you make an FOIA request doesn't mean the request will be granted. Aside from those few years between the HSCA declaring there was a second shooter and the dictabelt tape being discredited, the government has maintained that Oswald acted alone. Director Oliver Stone didn't agree, and in 1991 he released the film JFK. The film focused heavily on frame 313 of the Zapruder film, and Kennedy's head being knocked back into the left, trying to demonstrate that the shot had to have been fired from the grassy knoll. The film also alleged a conspiracy involving the FBI, CIA, and military as co-conspirators in the assassination. Stone's film played a major role in reshaping public perception about events, and Congress wanted to set the record straight. See, first part of that, double shooter, totally can believe in. Second part of that, involving the FBI, CIA, and military as co-conspirators, I'm like, where's the evidence for that? Show me some evidence. And it better be more than circumstantial. In 1992, and in no small part due to Stone's movie, Congress passed the JFK Records Act. The law set a firm 25-year time limit, with all assassination records being required to be released to the public in full by October 26, 2017. Unless the President of the United States decided to postpone them, that is. Well, 2017 has come and gone, and when time was running out on the clock, the FBI and CIA decided that they didn't really want to release that information. President Trump sided with the intelligence organizations, allowing them to postpone the release of thousands of documents until 2021, which the time of recording was last year, or when you're listening, probably 2 years ago, because these are recorded well in advance. Once 2021 came around, roughly 1,500 new documents were released, with President Biden allowing the rest to be postponed again until December 2022. That's this month. That's when I'm recording this. So depending on when this video releases, either there'll have been a major breakthrough or another delay, probably the latter. As best I can determine, there remain about 6,000 completely unreleased documents, with another 4,000 that have only been released in partially redacted form. Of the documents that still remain unclassified, the vast majority are files related to organized crime. This has led to heavy speculation that the mafia was involved in the assassination, though that speculation is by no means new. When Bobby Kennedy was given the news about his brother, he was reported as saying, "I knew they would get one of us. I thought it would be me." Bobby had been waging war against the mafia in his role as Attorney General, and they obviously didn't appreciate this. Yeah, but I don't think this is... Saying the mafia could have been involved in the Kennedy assassination, I don't believe... You're not a conspiracy theorist. You're just like, that is one person who could have potentially assassinated him. Could have been the Soviets. Could have been Cuba. Could have been Oswald just pissed off at Kennedy. I don't think... This doesn't fall into conspiracy theory for me. It just falls into we should all be critical thinkers and consider the different pieces of evidence. I mean, if there's no proof of it, you can't be like, it was the mafia. But to say that it doesn't seem like an unreasonable thing. There are claims that Jimmy Hoffa even explicitly said that it was time to kill the president. Those close to him believed his statement to be a joke, while lower-level mafia members were seen as taking his order deadly serious. The continued unwillingness of the government to even release redacted versions of these files with confidential informant names blacked out is seen as highly suspicious, with a strong implication that the mafia was somehow involved in the assassination. One of the members of the Warren Commission had argued against the mafia conspiracy theory in an interview in the 1970s. He said that they would have loved to have been able to tie the mafia to the assassination. Well, he was already trying to take them down, and if they had been responsible for JFK's death, then it would have completely turned the public against them. This would have aided the government in their goal of eliminating organized crime. That's not a terrible argument, but it leaves out a major detail that wouldn't have been revealed for decades. Project Johnny. It wasn't until after the 1992 Records Act that the public learned that the CIA, on behalf of President Kennedy, offered to pay the mafia $150,000 to assassinate Fidel Castro following the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. The mafia respectfully declined this proposal. They said they'd do it for free, out of their love for America. This was the reason they gave anyway, but of course, it wouldn't really be free. The marriage of the mafia and the Teamsters Union had made them nearly as powerful as the federal government. If they were to kill Castro on direct orders from the president, the way they saw it, they would own the entire fucking country. Of course, they never actually succeeded, and the Kennedys were growing increasingly impatient with the lack of results. Between Bobby Kennedy bearing down on the mafia, Jimmy Hoffa's misinterpreted joke, and the mafia's inability to do the one thing that would make them own the White House, it's not inconceivable that they could have been involved in the assassination in some way. If they had been, it would make sense to use Oswald as the fall guy rather than risk revealing the underhanded dealings between Kennedy and the mafia. Even if Oswald and the mafia hadn't been working in concert, his arrest was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Though the connection between the mafia and JFK is now known, if the mafia was involved in the assassination, the government is unlikely to voluntarily admit to lying to the entire country for the past 60 years, if they could avoid it. There's also the matter of Oswald's assassin, Jack Ruby. Ruby was a known associate of the Chicago Mafia, and many believe that the murder was carried out with police cooperation to silence Oswald. It's all circumstantial, but there's a good amount of circumstantial evidence. Yeah, it is like... The fact that he was assassinated is himself. Oswald was assassinated. It's just like, that's very convenient, isn't it? Unrelated to the mafia, there's also the matter of Oswald's trip to Mexico. It turns out there was a lot more to that trip than the CIA wanted people to believe. For example, Oswald, who was under much heavier surveillance than was initially let on, is known to have openly bragged about his plans to kill President Kennedy while he was there. Personally, I think they would have hid this information out of embarrassment, not because they were somehow complicit in the assassination, but while there are those that take it the other direction. Much more notable was Oswald's trip to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, if it even was Oswald. In 1993, the transcript of a phone call between J. Edgar Hoover and President Johnson was revealed. In it, Hoover says that they were all very confused about this incident. They had images and audio of a man who went to the embassy claiming to be Oswald, but it wasn't him. Neither the face nor the voice match Oswald, and Hoover believed there was a second person there with him. It's hard to call that revelation anything other than a bombshell, and it's the one piece of evidence that makes it difficult for me to argue that the two shooters weren't necessarily working together. Unless, I guess I must be missing something. Must be my smooth brain. But just because he has an accomplice and is doing something weird at an embassy with someone else, it's very circumstantial, isn't it? What am I missing? Let me know in the comments. Kevin will probably watch this and he'll be, Simon, is it not obvious? I'm like, it might be obvious to someone with a big brain like you, Kevin, or like 99% of the audience, but I don't understand. I just think it's circumstantial, or maybe I'm just too skeptical. One of the central arguments for the Oswald acted alone theory, particularly as put forth by the Warren Commission, is the single bullet theory. This is often referred to as the magic bullet theory because of how implausible it generally seems. The Warren Commission believed that the first bullet Oswald fired struck both Kennedy and Connolly, the second missed, and the third was the fatal headshot. Is this the bullet that traveled through like Connolly in a weird way, and now they're saying it also went through Kennedy's throat and then through Connolly's body? Please. For this to be possible, the bullet would have had to pierce through Kennedy's back brace, through his upper back, collide with one of his vertebrae, exit through his neck, enter Connolly's back, shatter 4 inches of rib, exit through Connolly's chest, enter Connolly's arm, shatter his radius into 8 pieces, and then exit through his palm and lodge in his thigh. That seems extremely unlikely. Whether or not that sequence of events would be physically possible is heavily debated. There's a lot of analysis of bullet angles and exactly how far to the left or right Connolly was sitting in his chair, and we're just not going to get into that. Instead, I'll just show you the bullet. This is the bullet that fell out of Connolly's thigh when he was placed on a stretcher in the hospital. Okay, I'm looking at it in front of me. I'm sure you're also looking at it on the screen, but for our podcast friends, I'll just say that it looks like a remarkably intact bullet. For the Warren Commission's findings to be true, that bullet that is in that condition, very good condition, had to have done all the damage we just said. If the bullet was rotated so that we could see the bottom of it, there is some extremely minor damage but the bullet is by and large intact. For comparison, here is one of the fragments of the headshot bullet. You'll notice that I say fragment as it did not remain in one piece. And for our listeners at home, it is just a small piece of wrecked metal. It does not look like a bullet at all. It looks like a fragment of a bullet, as Kevin just described. It's about a third to a quarter of the size of the bullet. The full bullet. The first bullet allegedly went through 2 people and multiple bones while remaining in almost pristine condition, but the other bullet that should have been from the same gun was crushed, deformed, and broken into pieces. Even if such an angle existed where both men's wounds were caused by one bullet, for that bullet to be in nearly pristine condition just seems a bit improbable, doesn't it? Again, yeah, it does. I don't think it's impossible. I don't find this to be the most compelling, like the state of the bullet. I find that to be a bit circumstantial. Could have been extremely lucky and just not got broken. I mean, people fall out of planes and survive, so I'm saying it's unlikely, but it's not conclusive. Also from the Warren Commission, there are a lot of reports of witness tampering, suppression, and intimidation. These are hard to substantiate, but I still figured it was worth mentioning. We already know that the government was hiding information about the assassination, like the details about Mexico, but there's one final piece of evidence that I'd like to discuss that indicates that the government may have been involved in a conspiracy. In 2014, the CIA said that they were. Okay, fine, it's a little more complicated than that. David Ribage, who has been a member of the CIA's history staff since 1996 and chief historian since 2005, published a report that CIA Director John McCone was part of what he called a benign cover-up. The report stated that the CIA had deliberately withheld information from the Warren Commission and instructed its officers to give the vaguest and least helpful answers to questions when possible. Ribage concluded that McCone was not interested in letting the public know the full truth, only in guiding the Warren Commission to what the agency believed at the time was the best truth, that Lee Harvey Oswald, for as yet undetermined motives, had acted alone in killing John Kennedy. It was a benign cover-up because McCone wasn't trying to cover up any CIA involvement in the assassination. He just wanted the American public to receive the most sanitized version of the truth, even if it was incomplete. I said this earlier, it looks good for the government. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I just think they were like, yeah, it's better if we look more competent and it doesn't look like we screwed up and it doesn't look like there's been someone on the loose or blah, 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 blah. They're not covering up some mafia thing, even though maybe that's possible. They're just trying to make themselves look good.
Aren't we all?
Unfortunately, unless the CIA or the FBI were actually involved in the assassination, this did more harm than good. The frequent revelations about information that was withheld from both the public and the Warren Commission, combined with the thousands of documents that are still not released, have eroded public confidence and only further fueled conspiracy theories. They say, oh, where there's smoke, there's fire, and the CIA is billowing. Not to mention the literal smoke that emanated from the Grassy Knoll. Wrap up. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about who besides Oswald might have been involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. People have pointed blame at the mafia, the CIA, the FBI, Soviet Union, Fidel Castro, or Cuban nationalists, some sort of Illuminati-style shadow government, the Secret Service, President Johnson, the Israeli government, the Federal Reserve, and even George H.W. Bush. Guys, there's not enough anti-Semitism in your conspiracy theories. Come on. These are not absurd enough. Where are the Nazis? Come on. That list is too long to even attempt to address who did it, and there's no hard evidence for any of them anyway. Based on Oswald's personal ties and Kennedy's activities, there's greater circumstantial evidence pointing towards the mafia, the Soviets, or the Cubans, but there's not enough to draw any reasonable conclusion. But I don't think you're a conspiracy theorist. Personally, I don't think this is a conspiracy theory. I just think there is something weird about it. We don't know the full truth. We don't know who did it. It seems very unlikely that Oswald was just doing this on his own. I'd say we don't know. Maybe it was Oswald acting alone. But I just think I don't think it's conspiracy theory. I just think there are many potential guilty parties and we don't know which one it was. Is that how conspiracy people really feel? Is that how people who don't believe we landed on the moon, they're like, it's not a conspiracy theory. God, am I becoming one of these people? Shit. There is other circumstantial out there that I just couldn't get into in the interest of time, but for any of our viewers who really want to believe the American government was somehow involved in the assassination, I'd recommend looking into the death of journalist Dorothy Kilgallen and her missing files. To have tried to address her alleged suicide would be an entire episode by itself. That sounds fascinating, and Kevin, if you're up for it and the comments are keen for it, let's do that. That sounds like part 2, to be honest. But since our goal wasn't to try and address which of the myriad of conspiracies was most likely, it brings us back to the question at the heart of this episode. Was there a second shooter on the grassy knoll? Like I said at the beginning, when I began this project, I assumed the answer would obviously be no and would just have some fun dunking on conspiracy theories, but that is no longer the case. Yeah, people have been asking for this episode for ages. Like, when is the one where Simon is persuaded? And I kind of went into this less skeptical than before because the Kennedy assassination is the thing where I'm like, there's more, something's up with that. It's weird. And I've come even more convinced, like reading about it, learning about it today, that there is something weird there. I probably think there was a second shooter. I'm a conspiracy theorist. Get me my tinfoil hat. The key physical evidence seems to strongly suggest the evidence of another shot fired from behind the stockade fence on the grassy knoll. Even without the Dictabelt audio, the frame-by-frame analysis of the Zapruder film seems almost irrefutable. Combined with all the witness accounts and the trajectory of the blood and skull fragments, I really don't know how to argue that there wasn't a second shooter. I'm curious to hear what you, Simon, and our viewers think. Maybe I've inadvertently left you with some huge unanswered question, or maybe there's some contradictory evidence that you feel I didn't value highly enough. You can all feel free to argue about it in the comment section, and I'll be back next time. Back and to the left. Thank you everybody for listening or watching this podcast. If you enjoyed in its audio form, please leave a review. That is super helpful. It gets the podcast into more people's catchers? Is that the official term? Podcast apps? I don't know. And yeah, if you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, and thank you for watching. See you next time.